Mana. Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. Sekarang saya di Skytree. Mana. Mana. Sekarang di apartment Tokyo. So I'm just in my apartment in Tokyo and I am doing an interview with Moss here.
Bismillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, dear listeners. Welcome to the third recorded episode of season 3 of The Scholar and the Student. So 3-3, alhamdulillah. Last week, we had all the way from the UK, our first female guest on The Scholar and the Student. We had Sana Fatima Asim. Today, we have all the way from the land of the rising sun, our second female guest. It's not Sana, even though Sana said that she's going to go back to Japan, inshallah. Today, we have Mana, all the way from Japan. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to The Scholar and the Student.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm very happy and honored to be on the show today.
MashaAllah, mashallah. And welcome to Botswana virtually as well. I know you're quite well traveled, but I'm going to wager to say you've never been down here before.
Yes, that is true. I've never been to Botswana, so I'd love to hear more about what Botswana is like.
Excellent. And I think we will definitely talk more about that as we unravel what life has been like for you. And you've got a YouTube channel. Everyone go follow that, PanAsian Goes Global, and you can plug in everything else that you want along the way. So let's start off with a little bit about yourself. Who is Mana and what's up with the intro, Mana, which is on every single video of yours?
Yeah, sure. So, so my name is Mana. That's my nickname. If you've ever seen any of my YouTube videos, I usually start with Mana, sekarang di Tokyo, or whatever it is. And so where that intro comes from is Mana in Malay and also Indonesian means where. And so I'm usually in different places. Well, right now I'm in Japan, but I do different things in Tokyo. And my background is that I'm Malay. So I was kind of have in some ways, kind of a different background in some ways. So I was born in Canada. I grew up there, but my family is originally from Singapore, predominantly Malay family. So that's how I decided to start my videos with Mana. So having the where and then my name Mana, putting those two together. So that's where the Mana came from.
That's cool. And it's really catchy, I would say. I'm not sure if we have one for the scholar and the student, but we'll figure it out as we go. So you mentioned being from Singapore. That's amazing. Being from Canada at the same time. That being said, I'm guessing you've been to Singapore many a time. So I would just like to kind of go on off this limb that you've been in Singapore, you've been in Canada, grew up in Canada, I assume, and now you're in Japan. You mentioned that you were in Korea about 10 years ago. So what's your experience been like as a Muslimah living in all these different areas and having to sort of be part of the community? The highs, the lows, the good parts, bad parts, everything. Let us know.
Yeah, so definitely. So I grew up, as I mentioned before, I grew up in Vancouver in British Columbia, Greater Vancouver. But most of my relatives are in Singapore, so I try to go back every few years if I can, or more often if I can. And around 10 years ago, I lived in Korea for 1.5 years. And then after living in Korea, a few years later, I lived in Japan for the first time, in a different part of Japan, a more rural area, for 3 years, went back to Canada, and then now I'm in Japan again for a second time, but this time living the big city life in some ways in Tokyo. And in terms of the community, it's kind of interesting because sometimes when I meet people here, like some Muslim friends here, in Japan, they're like, wow, there's like, are there a lot of like Muslims in Canada? They're surprised when I tell them, yeah, there's definitely Muslims. You know, there's halal places, there's mosques, and I guess maybe some of them don't really have this like image of Muslims being in Canada. And then when I'm in Canada, people are like, what? There are Muslims in Japan? And I'm like, yes, there's a lot of Muslims in Japan too. Of course, there's a lot more non-Muslims in both countries, in Canada, Japan, and well, in Korea as well. Singapore, it's still majority is still non-Muslim, but there's a much greater population of Muslims compared to like the general population compared to, you know, Korea, Japan, or Canada. But in all those places, there are Muslims. So I think one thing to remember is that while there's lots of Muslims like worldwide, we have I mean, not the largest population in terms of religion, but definitely there are a lot of Muslims in the world. So yeah, I think that's, okay, that's, I don't know if I really answered that question, but I guess it kind of touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I totally understand what you're saying. And the reason why I mentioned why this episode is connected to last week's episode as well is because Sana, who was our previous guest, and I don't believe it's coincidence that her name is Sana and your name is Mana. There must be some divine happenings behind the scenes over there. So she worked in Japan for about 6 months, and she's been like deep into Japanese culture since she was like 14 years old. And she's going back there. Inshallah, in June, she'll be in Kyoto, which is a bit further away from Tokyo.
Yeah.
But she was really enthusiastic about this episode. So I have to send her a link as soon as we're done recording, because she was very enthusiastic to hear about the Osaka Dawa Center, which I mentioned. I saw that video of yours with brother Zulqarnain, and the interesting interview that you had with him over there. So yeah, I know she'll be looking out for this. But we had a long conversation, Sana and myself, about, you know, it being somewhat difficult, at least in her experience. And I don't want to detract from her experience, but her difficulty being a Muslimah in Japan when it comes to like finding halal food and finding a place to pray. And I came at it from this angle, saying that, you know, in Botswana, Muslims are a minority as well, but although we're somewhat of a visible minority. So then the conversation sort of centered around, if I went to Japan, would I find it as daunting as she did? Or would it be, because I don't come from a Muslim majority country, and the UK isn't Muslim majority either, but they've got, even though they might be a minority too, their Muslim population is like through the charts. So they've got like basically enclaves that are entirely Muslim over there. But she didn't say that she grew up in such an area. But that being said, what's your take on this? I mean, coming from one country, which was Canada, where Muslims are a minority, and going to Japan, what's the comparison like in terms of finding a place to pray and halal food? Because Japanese culture and Japanese perceptions of Islam are different from Canadian and American and everything else perceptions.
For sure. It's actually very interesting, because a lot of people ask me, you know, my Canadian friends, Canadian Muslim friends, like, oh, it must be so hard to live in Japan. You know, there's not a lot of Muslims, but these are Muslims coming from also a minority group in Canada as well. And it's very interesting that you say that. So I feel, I think it depends where you are in Japan. So when I lived in Japan the first time, this was also a few years back as well. So obviously, as time goes on, there's an increase of halal shops, restaurants that have halal food, prayer places, masjids. It's growing as time goes on. But when I was in Japan the first time, I was in more rural Japan. So in that prefecture, there was only one mosque. And the first thing, like before moving there, I went through the JET program. So you don't actually get to choose where you go, but in your application, you can put like where you want to go. And then if you are successful, they will tell you where you're placed. So when I got Kumamoto Prefecture, Yatsushiro City, the first thing I did was search if there was a masjid in that prefecture, and there was. So it was just like, I guess, an hour plus driving, or like an hour and a half by transit, but I was still happy that there is a masjid there. So in more rural areas, I think it can be a bit more challenging, because there's probably going to maybe be like a few halal shops, probably near the central masjid there. And there's probably like a few halal restaurants, but it's not like you can just go down any street and you'll find a halal restaurant. However, I found that different. I haven't that had a different experience here in Tokyo because I'll go somewhere even with non-Muslim friends, and I'll end up finding a halal option. Speaking of which, yesterday I went to an anime convention for the very first time, and it was funny. We were going for lunch,
All
and
right.
I was with a few non-Muslim friends and my friends' friends, and they're like, "Oh, I don't think you're gonna find halal here." Like they knew what it was. They're not Muslim, but they knew what it was. And then it was funny because a few seconds later, we're looking at the menu of a restaurant that was in front of us, and I see at the bottom there's Muslim friendly. So I'm like, okay, well, I think I know what food I'm gonna get. So actually, I find in Tokyo, I am often pleasantly surprised by the amount of like halal food. So I think if you're coming from a Muslim majority country, so if you're coming from Malaysia or Indonesia, I think that it's going to be a lot less than what you're used to. But for me, coming from Canada or having lived in Korea, to me, this seems actually like it's easier for me to eat halal, like find halal restaurants in Tokyo versus Greater Vancouver. I think because the population of Tokyo is just a lot more larger than Vancouver. So the population isn't as much. So even when you think about the number of Muslims too, there's a lot more Muslims as well.
Oh, wow, mashallah. That's very interesting. So all the anime fans and otakus rejoice. We can go to anime conventions and eat halal, alhamdulillah. So yeah, you'll be seeing me there soon, inshallah. But
Inshallah.
coming back to the point of halal food, it's interesting because I've noticed, by the way, I also work in the halal committee of my hometown,
Oh,
where
okay.
yeah, I'm not there right now. I'm right now in the capital city of Botswana called Gaborone, but this is not where I'm from. I was born here, but I grew up in the north in Palape. So I'm part of their halal committee. And I say this on almost every episode because it's an accolade. It's something we're very proud of. The first halal KFC in Botswana was certified by us, and then it was like a chain reaction. So if you ever come
That's
to
so cool.
yeah, if you ever come to Botswana and you see halal KFC, you'll know, hey, that was Moss's idea, or that was Moss's responsibility over there. So
Nice.
yeah,
Okay.
alhamdulillah. So that being said, I think in Botswana, we have kind of a different approach to halal certification in terms of restaurants anyway. Yeah, there might be, I don't know, an uncle from Pakistan with his random shop over there selling Pakistani cuisine, which is welcome, alhamdulillah. But we've taken to this sort of certifying franchises. So I mentioned KFC, there's Nando's for all my British fans. It originated here, by the way. It's African cuisine. What else is there that's well, there are some South African franchises. I doubt that strike a chord. We don't have McDonald's. Maybe I should say alhamdulillah for that. But yeah, so our approach has been we certify the big franchises, and that way we get a lot of restaurants certified at once, because if the headquarters is certified, then everything else sort of follows in line, and that makes it easier for our consumer base. Whereas in Japan, I've not heard of anything like a halal McDonald's or a halal KFC. It seems to be more like low key or looking more towards the smaller shops, which isn't a bad thing per se. But yeah, I just found that interesting. Is that a correct assessment, would you say?
No, that's totally correct. And I like that would be really cool if they were able to halalify, KFC, McDonald's and things like this. But I think because still, even though the number of Muslims it's growing, it's still not the majority. We're still very much a minority. And so I think, there's a lot of non-Muslim Japanese people who enjoy their, I don't know, pork things, pork burgers or what, I don't know, things made with pork. So I think it would be, or just like non-halal beef and chicken, it would be hard, I think, for them to not have pork items on the menu. But at least I think, in some ways that's kind of like, oh, it's too bad we don't get these like fast food or, chain restaurants that are halal. But maybe in some ways it might be a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing that McDonald's is not halal. Because like whenever I go back to Singapore, in Singapore and Malaysia, fast food restaurants are generally halal. More so in Malaysia than Singapore. But yeah, whenever I go back to Singapore, I just eat, KFC, McDonald's, it's not all halal. So all I want to do is just eat all the fast food. And then I go back to like, a cousin's house or an aunt's house. And of course they want to feed me again. So all I'm doing is eating. But yeah, in Japan, it's just like, standalone restaurants. There are like a few that might have a few branches, like one in Tokyo and like one in like Kyoto. There are a few like ramen places like that, but still the number's pretty small. And then in terms of like certification, like, so there's a website organization called Halal Media Japan. And so there are restaurants that are certified halal. So they've gone through this whole process. But if people are not if they don't mind so much about having it like fully certified yet, because there's some people who actually provide halal meat, but they haven't, or they're going through the process of getting it certified. Like they might not have like, it might not be on a big website yet, but if you talk to the owner or you talk to someone, like, they provide halal meat. So if you go that way, there's actually more options. But if you want to stick to the ones that are like certified and it's like very, very official, then there might be less options. But I think there are a good number of options here in Tokyo.
That's interesting because we have pretty much the same ish when it comes to certification, the same situation here in Botswana. So, I mean, we've got the main certifying agency, which is Botswana Halal Authority, and then Palape Halal Committee is kind of which I'm a part of. It's kind of a subdivision, or it works under the Botswana Halal Authority, however you want to put it. And there are a couple of places. In fact, it's interesting because to find like non-halal chicken in Botswana is kind of a mission, since like the main like chicken abattoir is like owned by Muslims, like it's halal certified itself. And in fact, it's called Botswana Meat Commission, which is like one of our exports is beef, by the way, in Botswana. And because we export to a lot of Arab countries and they are Muslim, it is important that the meat should be certified halal. So our main beef abattoir is also certified halal, BMC. It's in Lobatse. And it's really, ever since, like even before independence, like when we were still under the British, Botswana beef was really the talk of the town. I know in Japan you've got Wagyu beef, but hey, Botswana beef, I would say, well, I don't know. I've never had Wagyu beef before, but I'd like to see how they stack up against each other. And yeah, there are a couple of places. I think most places in Botswana, you would get halal chicken anyway, unless literally they're slaughtering chickens in their backyard, which isn't actually unheard of, by the way. But for mass produced stuff, most of that would be halal. But of course, for your own like prudence, you wouldn't just go and eat at a place like randomly because you don't know what they're mixing with. It's interesting that pork, although it does exist in Botswana, is not actually that popular. In fact, it wasn't until like the last few years that I started seeing pork being sold at supermarkets. Before that, I knew what pork was and I knew that we never eat it, but I never saw it like being sold. So I guess people eat it, but it's honestly not that popular around here, for better or for worse, alhamdulillah. But coming back to the whole, or tying this down to Muslim societies in various places in the world, I noticed, and this could be a wrong assessment, you're free to correct me, Japanese Muslims, whether you take it to mean native Japanese people who have embraced Islam or the diaspora of various peoples who have come to Japan and formed the Muslim community in Japan, whether it's Tokyo or wherever else, they seem to be a lot more tolerant when it comes to issues of faith and a lot more accommodating compared to, obviously, I'm going to use Botswana as a frame of reference, and also some of the nonsense you see coming out from places like the UK and the US, where people actually get into fights. I mean, literal fist fights. It's literally like, you'd think it's an anime or something inside the masjid for some stupid reason because of some guy prays differently or something. That actually happens. So I've never heard of something ridiculous like that happening in Japan. What's your take on that, and why do you think that is the case?
Yeah, I think I mean, I don't think people have had any physical fights over that. And I think people, like, there's so many, like, people come from all sorts of different places. And I think because we're such a minority, people, well, actually, no. I think the first thing is people tend to group together with their like ethnic community. So like Indonesians, not all, but Indonesians tend to stick to a lot of, not all Indonesians, many Indonesians will stick to Indonesians, Malaysians will stick to Malaysians, Pakistani will stick to Pakistani. So the people that they're more frequently with are those from the same background who probably maybe follow the same madhab as them. But yeah, at the mosque, I haven't seen any like I think people do have maybe differences of opinion, but I haven't really seen anyone like no, my way is the right way, your way is the wrong way. I have seen that in Canada though, but not in Japan, and I also don't think in Korea. But yeah, like I think in Canada, maybe not, I don't know if I've had a first-hand experience of this, but I think I have heard of people who, maybe they're praying in a certain way or whatever, like doing stuff in a certain way, and saying like, oh, you're not supposed to do it this way, it's supposed to be this way. But actually, the person who was giving that, advice or, those words, they are coming from this specific madhab or this specific way of thinking, versus the person who is being told that they're from a different point of view, or different madhab, or that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't think Japan, like the Muslims in Japan, I think people just kind of, these are the Indonesians are together, or Egyptians are together. But then there's some big masjids, like I like going to Tokyo Chami, which is the biggest masjid here in Japan. And like a lot of non-Muslims actually come to the masjid as well. They have like tours every Saturday and Sunday, every Saturday and Sunday, like in the afternoon. So yeah, it's quite, I would say, generally pretty accepting. Maybe there are cases of people, disagreeing about how they practice Islam in some ways, but I personally, I don't think I have experienced that. So
That's amazing. And yeah, I completely agree with you on Tokyo Jame. I've been following them forever. And speaking of Tokyo Jame, I once saw a music video shot outside there by a Muslim musician. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on YouTube. It's by Abdul Hadi Masamichi. Well, Abdul Hadi is obviously his chosen Muslim name. And yeah, he was openly playing guitar outside the masjid.
oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, yeah. And obviously, if you did that in Botswana, you would be cancelled as soon as yesterday. And
Yeah.
I can totally see that happening in Canada, because I've had a guest on my show. His name's Imam Madhar Mahmoud. He's from Canada, but he studied like closer to us. He studied in South Africa. So that's where he got his Islamic sciences degree, if you will. So he really went on about this and how people are quite cultish in their mindsets at times. And it's interesting you bring up madhab, because I mentioned this publicly for the first time, perhaps in the last episode. I follow the Maliki madhab. So it's going to be interesting seeing the reactions if I ever pray in Tokyo Jame or some other masjid in Japan, because when we pray in the Maliki madhab, we don't fold our hands. So there's no question, is it here, is it there? We just leave them to the side. And
Oh, okay.
yeah, so it's going to be really
So it's not on
interesting.
your body, it's just on the side when you pray.
Exactly. And
Okay.
yeah, that's the majority opinion within our madhab. There is an opinion that says that you can fold it, as in it's permissible, but basically what's being illustrated is that if you don't fold your hands in prayer, you haven't missed out a wajib, something that's compulsory. So you don't need to
Yeah.
make up the prayer, or you don't need to sort of make a sajda sahwa or whatever it is. So yeah, it's interesting. And yeah, coming back to the whole thing of tolerance and Muslim communities world over, how has it been for yourself? You mentioned teaching English, and all your videos are also about that. Okay, let's start from there. What got you into teaching English? And when you say teaching English, I assume that means like teaching English as a foreign language, as opposed to, I mean, we studied English in school as well. And I don't know if you can tell, but English is kind of my first language because I grew up speaking it, and obviously other languages too. But when we learned English at school, it wasn't for the purposes of saying, good morning, how are you? It was about writing essays and stories and almost novels at points. So what's your sort of curriculum like? Like, what do you have to teach the kids, and why'd you get into that in the first place?
So actually, I teach at an international school. So what I'm teaching is not, the curriculum is not really centered on teaching English as a foreign language. So I'm teaching it as like English language arts, but knowing that a lot of my kids don't speak English as their first language. So I've arranged, it depends which courses I'm teaching at that time. Some classes have more students who have lived abroad, or went to international schools their whole life. Other classes or the courses might have students who just wanted to be better at English, but they've never studied abroad. They've never went to international school, but they just want to get better at English. And then in terms of like how I got into this, I guess when I was a kid, I think I was the kind of kid who just wanted to be everything when I grew up, until I guess when I got to elementary school, there were a few different professions that I was pretty interested in. But it wasn't until I lived in Japan the first time. So that was actually right after I had finished my undergrad, and I didn't study education. I studied international studies, but I went on the JET program. So you don't need an education degree or a teaching license to go on the JET program. So I did that for 3 years, and in that position as assistant language teacher, or ALT, I was in the classroom. We're supposed to be an assistant, but in reality, a lot of us became kind of the main teacher in some of our schools. So when I was acting more as the T1 or the main teacher, I really enjoyed it. I was, creating lesson plans, implementing these lessons and teaching kids, and I found that I really enjoyed it. So when I went back to Canada after my first time living in Japan, I decided that I would pursue education professionally. So I went back to school, got certified, and then I was teaching in Canada for a year and a half or so before coming back to Japan this time around.
Okay, amazing. And is the JET program as notorious as they say, as in this angle that almost everyone I've talked to who's done JET, they always mention that they write down that they would like to be placed in a certain place, Tokyo, for example, and then they get sent to some rural town, which they've never heard of before. And the people who do put in the names of rural towns get sent to Tokyo instead. So is that really the case? And why the hell do they do that? Because that just sounds like a mind game of its own.
Yeah, I think, it really depends. So when I was applying for the JET program, so there's like your first, second, and third choice. I had put down Fukuoka as my first choice, my second choice as Hyogo, like that's where Kobe is. Kobe is in Hyogo Prefecture, and my third choice as Kyushu, like the island of Kyushu. Kyushu has like a bunch of prefectures. So I did not get my first or second choice, but I did get my third choice. I got a place, a rural place. It's still considered a city, but more of a rural place in my third choice. And a lot of the people who are placed in the same prefecture as me, most of us actually put Fukuoka as our first choice, but Fukuoka is like the biggest city there. And we ended up getting places in Kumamoto. But the interesting thing about me applying to those places, before applying, I already had Japanese friends at that time. And so I was talking to them about like where I should put, like what places I should put for my, first, second, third choice. And I was kind of thinking like bigger cities, just because I wanted to, I don't know. I felt that bigger cities would allow me to have like better networks and like, I don't know, I could do something in the future. But I was thinking maybe Aichi Prefecture, because I did a kind of a homestay exchange thing in high school, and that's where my homestay family is. Or maybe one of the bigger cities. But when I was talking to a few Japanese friends, they said, the next few years there's going to be a big earthquake in the Kanto area. So Kanto's like around Tokyo, or in the Kansai area, which is around like Kyoto, Osaka, Kobe. So you should probably avoid those two areas. But a safe area is Kyushu. So if you want to avoid earthquakes, you should go to Kyushu. The ironic thing is, I experienced a huge earthquake in 2016 in Kumamoto. So it was literally 3 months before my contract was finishing. And I experienced the big Kumamoto earthquake. So I actually did not get to escape from the earthquake experience.
Wow, amazing. So I guess earthquakes is just something you get used to, because there was a huge one in Tokyo not too long ago. I think it was about a week ago.
Yeah.
And what you were having snow in the middle of spring, that was also like absolutely mind-blowing. Like, how did that happen? But
so just saying maybe global warming?
I guess. Yeah, well, we'll take it in stride, inshallah. I was going to ask though, you've been teaching English to kids in Canada, you were in Korea for a long time, you've been in Japan. What's the attitudes of these kids been generally? I mean, does one particular region stick out to you as these guys are all a bunch of rowdy punks, for example, and those guys are very well mannered, Japanese people, so on and so forth? What are the stereotypes true, and how do they generally flow from there?
Yeah. So I can't really speak about Korea because at that time I was an exchange student. So I never like taught students in Korea. I did. Yeah. So, maybe people's kids kind of thing, but I wasn't a teacher in Korea at that time. So in terms of teaching kids, so when I was on the JET program, it was just teaching English. But in Canada, like if you have your teaching license, you can teach anything from K to 12. So I wasn't just teaching English, it was like a classroom teacher, it was an elementary school classroom teacher teaching all the subjects. So I taught, math, social science, all of that. And then in my current job, I am mostly teaching English language arts, but I have taught career education. I'm going to teach math and science. So it's a few things. Like the medium is English, but it's not necessarily that I'm teaching English, and it's not English as a second language. It is English language arts. So how to be a better writer, or how to support your opinion, that sort of thing. In terms of students' attitudes, I think people definitely have that stereotype that, oh, all Japanese kids are super well behaved and they're great, and they'll never be rebellious. They're like wonderful, they're shy. And those stereotypes apply to some kids. But I also got those kinds of kids in Canada too. There were kids who were just, their personality, they're just they keep to themselves more. And then there's always going to be more outgoing kids. And sometimes kids, especially when you get to the teenage years, they go through that rebellious stage, I don't know, these hormones, and they just don't want to listen to their teacher. So I think, like in Tokyo right now, where I'm working, it's a private school. So I think it's definitely a different group of students compared to when I was working at a public school in rural Japan. And that was just like, most kids just went to that school because it was closest to them. So it wasn't really like they chose to go to that junior high school or that elementary school. Versus the school that I'm working at now, where students, they have to apply to get in. So it's definitely different. Like I think on average, the students at my current school, a lot more academic, and kids like want to learn. But I would say kids when I worked in Japan the first time were also wanting to, like, some of them were interested in English, but maybe more so just to like be able to talk to foreigners, not maybe necessarily to, get a job in the future. Where the kids that I'm working with now, some of them are interested in that. But yeah, I definitely, I think once you get to the teenage age, like kids are kind of the same wherever. So whether they're in Canada or they're in Japan, there's that rebellious stage where like, they're still good, they're great, but you just got to wait a couple years until they kind of calm down a little bit.
Do you have any tips and tricks for any teachers listening in on this? Like, how do they manage teenagers, or maybe some parents are listening in? What are some good tricks we can use to calm teenagers down? Because I know that I was also probably in that rebellious group when I was a teenager. It's been many years, but I know what I was.
Yeah, for sure. I think from the beginning, kind of just making sure they know what the expectations are, setting that up, and then also making sure that they know you're there, like as a teacher, that the kids know that you're there to support them. But I think a lot of the time, sometimes kids just need a little bit of space. So maybe like, this is what you need to do. Make sure that they know, what the expectations are, but also know that you are there for them. But at the same time, if they're not really wanting to connect in that moment, don't try to force it too much. But just treat them like, even if they were maybe rude to you the day before, I think you should still, try to like, okay, it's a new day. Let's try to, start fresh, kind of thing.
Fantastic, amazing. And I think it really echoes, because on this podcast, I've had my former principal from my high school on, and he said pretty much the same thing as yourself. And I can attest to it happening, because interesting fact, and we'll speak on this more. I went to a high school where boys were allowed to wear earrings, and boys were allowed to grow their hair like myself, as long as it was tied up neatly at the back. And there was no, initially when the school started, there was like a rule, you have to be clean shaven. But then it was sort of waived to, if you're Muslim, because there is an interpretation that says that you have to have a beard. So they're like, okay, Muslims can keep beards. And then that just fizzled out to, no one cares if you have a beard or not, as long as you keep it tidy. So we're really like, although we're also an international school, we're really like, when it comes to rules, I guess, liberal, if you want to use that word. But what my principal, Mr. Kleinans, what he mentioned is that we always had an expectation that these kids should act like ladies and gentlemen. And even though they had earrings in their ears, even though they had tied hair, even though they had unshaved chins or whatever, he always got compliments from other school heads saying that, how are your kids so well behaved? Like, what are you putting in the water? How are you indoctrinating them? He's like, there's nothing. I just let the expectations lead. And that's amazing. But this brings me to another question. First of all, we talked about liberal school rules. Are international schools in Japan of the same caliber, or do they also kind of follow the same suit that, guys can wear earrings and, I know in like the US, there's hardly a uniform. We have a uniform, but it was like, yeah, it was there. But as long as you look presentable is the point. And also we've seen a lot of crazy things coming out of Japan recently, like ponytails were banned, apparently, maybe not everywhere, but that was a huge headline a few days ago. What's your take on this as a teacher, and why are these things even coming up? I mean, ponytails for girls, not boys, girls.
Yeah, actually, so the vast majority of Japan, they wear uniforms. So whether you're in public school or private school, I wouldn't say 100% of schools, but majority of them do. So, and especially if you are at a private school, which mine is a private school, there are a lot of rules in place. So there's definitely like, yep, no earrings, you can't dye your hair. Yeah, and you always like, I think also because the kids come, like they leave their house in the uniform, they come back. And so if they were to do anything in their uniform, people will, be like, oh, students from school A did this thing, which is not good. And it's very like Japanese society, even though it is like, it is like my kind of program is kind of special. So it is more of, although it is an international school like in terms of how it works, it's more of an international program, like a school within a school in a way. So they still belong to the greater Japanese private school. And with private schools or just any schools in Japan, there are a lot of rules in place. So yeah, definitely a lot more structure in Japan compared to Canada, where it's kind of very free in terms of what people can wear. There aren't really, I don't even think there are real rules for clothes in Canada. But yes, in Japan, definitely, even with the school uniforms, it has to, like, you can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to wear my blazer out and like undo my tie, you have to still has to be look proper and all that. So.
All right, amazing. And what about the second point in regards to girls not being allowed to tie their hair, which is like a very basic hairstyle, if you can even call it a style? It's just a way of keeping yourself neat, I guess. But why do such things come out of Japan? What is your take as someone who has been living in Japan for such a while? And well, I don't want you to lose your job, but if you want to chip in on why you think that's fair and unfair, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, maybe I've missed this. I haven't heard of this like no ponytail rule, because the students, or at least at my school, like, I mean, they can't have like wacky hair, but it should look neat. So either they have their hair down or it's like in a neat ponytail. But I haven't heard of this like no ponytail rules. I'm not sure, maybe if it's a specific school, or maybe I just need to read the news more and see, or maybe it's something that was published more outside of Japan than inside of Japan, perhaps. I don't know.
Maybe. From what I recall of the headline, I think it was one school in Fukuoka that started it. And then the way certain commenters were talking about it, obviously, whether it's one school or a million, it still rings kind of problematic. But I think what they were saying is that, yeah, now it's in Fukuoka, but it could just spread to other places in Japan. So yeah, you never know.
Yeah. I'm not sure why they would do that, to be honest, because it doesn't really fit the idea of how Japan usually follows a lot of structure. Because I think ponytails can often make your hairstyle or make your hair a bit more tamed in a way sometimes. So I am actually really don't know what to say about that, because I feel like Japan, like it wouldn't make sense for Japan to put that in place, because ponytails would just make it more neat in a lot of cases. But yeah, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's something worth looking into in your own time, I guess. But then coming
Yeah.
back to you being a Muslimah and a teacher at the same time, how do you balance the whole, you've got to pray at the same time, and maybe long hours, maybe you've got an extracurricular activity to watch over on a certain day. Ramadan is on its way, but I don't know if your school will be open by then. It is spring season, so I guess schools are closed. So obviously in previous years you would have had to have fasted whilst you were teaching. How did you manage all that? And I know Japanese, well, northern hemisphere fasting hours are, well, they seem really crazy to us in the southern hemisphere, because we barely go over like 13 hours ever. So
Okay.
yeah, so when we see like people fasting for 16 hours, I've done that. I was once in India for Ramadan, but I'm not sure if I could, well, I probably could, but doing that year in, year out, it's definitely not easy. So how did you manage to go through that? And were your coworkers understanding of the fact that, oh, it's lunch hour, so she has to pray now, she can't, take any students or whatever the case may be, and we can't invite her to, I don't know if teachers have nomikai, but I know that's definitely a thing in other Japanese firms. So how do you decline those sort of invitations, or what's your approach to them?
Yeah, so at my school, I don't have a set place, but I have like kind of, I guess, my prayer bag. So I have like the stuff I need to pray with. And then I also have a sign. So I usually, there's like a few meeting rooms that are often, but not always, um, empty. So what I would do is I would put that sign up, which basically says like, I need 5 minutes to pray. So, there's like one washroom, which is like, I guess, the guest washroom, which is just like one stall, like just that only one person, so I can take my wudu in peace. And then I would go and pray. So it's not in my staff room. So I actually haven't, like, only my admin like knows that I pray. Like I only had the conversation with my initial admin who had had the conversation, and that person had helped me to create that sign. But afterwards, like, I kind of just go, I don't tell the other teachers. And I think most of them, like a few of them, if they stay, because I tend to stay late at work, but if they stay late, they'll see that I like go off for a few minutes and come back. And see, people are always like in and out of our staff room too, because sometimes the other teachers might go and talk to some students, or go talk to other teachers in the other staff room, or have a meeting somewhere else. So I haven't like directly told my staff, but they all know that I'm Muslim. Yeah, and they know that like I eat halal, because sometimes like the school might provide like bento, like lunch boxes, but because I can't eat the meat, they know that sometimes I get like a different bento than everyone else, so they all know I'm Muslim. In terms of fasting, yeah, I mean, people are kind of doing their own thing at lunch. Sometimes people are helping students, sometimes people are actually eating lunch, but people also, sometimes if they have blocks before lunch that are free, or after, they might actually eat before or after. So people aren't always just eating lunch all at the same time. So it's not really a big deal for me. I just probably would use that time, that lunchtime, to go and pray. Maybe I would just won't be as rushed sometimes, because sometimes it's like I only have so much time. I have to get certain things done, and then I have a block to do a bunch of things and pray. But sometimes, I will be honest, sometimes it is really challenging. Like sometimes there are like parent teacher interviews, or there's like meetings where all the meeting rooms are occupied, and I don't feel comfortable just like, I wouldn't really have room to pray if it's during school hours, during classes. I can't just pray in the hallway, because kids could be coming in at any time, and I just would not have any concentration. And it's just like, because people would need to like go across me or behind me, or to get somewhere. So there have been times when those special like events at school happen, where all the meeting rooms are occupied, and all the classes is during class, like during school hours, and I'm like, okay. So there's been times, unfortunately, I'm just like, okay, I will pray this prayer later, which I'm not proud of, but sometimes it's really hard. So but that can also happen in Canada, or even I think in Muslim countries too, where you try, like, I don't know, it just doesn't work out. I'm not saying this should happen, of course. We should always be trying to pray 5 times a day, but it's also something I'm still working on as well.
I think it's something a lot of people are working on, including myself. And sometimes life just gets in the way, and well, stuff happens. So everyone's on their journey of faith, and we make do with what we can, inshallah. So this is the point in the interview where I sort of throw the ball over to you. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask me about my platform, or Botswana, or anything else, or anything that we've spoken about today thus far, or something random?
Yeah.
I don't mind. And don't worry about being controversial, because I have a thick skin.
Oh, okay. How did you end up starting this podcast?
Oh, that's a interesting question. Initially, it was part of not the Halal committee, but we've got like many subcommittees, like the masjids, the mosques in Botswana are run by committees. So each town will have their committee. So I'm from Palape. So I kind of fell in with the youth committee of Palape, because I am still young, I guess. And we used to do a lot of like events together, like, have a night out for the kids, and, maybe have a game of football, which is soccer for you American people. But yeah, so, just have a good time with the kids, make sure that, they are in the environment of the masjid, that kind of stuff, have open sessions with our imams and have a good time, basically. So I proposed it to them that because we were kind of having a drought, like nothing was happening. This is before COVID. So I'm like, why don't we start a podcast? Because it's like, you know, we don't always have to come to one single location. One guy can be in charge of getting ideas for the podcast. One guy can be in charge of editing. The other guy can be in charge of uploading and making sure the YouTube algorithm and the search engine optimization is all in place, all that jazz. That was how it was initially pitched. Like, let's make this something for Palape Muslim Youth Committee. But stuff happened and that didn't really pan out because I guess people didn't really see the benefit of having a podcast. The reason why it was my idea is because I just started listening to podcasts like a lot. Like, it's literally all I'd do. Like, I'd be in uni and I'd finish my class or something and I'd pop in a podcast. I kind of still am like that. So when I do something, I'm kind of this mindset, hey, maybe I can do this too. I mean, it's not like, you know, shooting a movie for Hollywood or like directing a Netflix drama. It's initially I didn't even plan to have video. I just had this equipment which I got, and we did the first episode in Palape with our Imam Jawad. And yeah, that's how it was kind of conceived. It's going to be a youth thing. Then it just came on to me and allowed me to do my own independent thing. That's why it kind of got controversial, because I got a few guests on who said many things that I know many people are not happy about. So yeah, in hindsight, I say, alhamdulillah, it didn't work out with the youth committee, but alhamdulillah, I allowed it to be like my personal project. And that's what I treat it as now. It's kind of like writing a book. So like 10 years, 20 years from now, I don't know where I'll be, but people can say, hey, who was that guy from Botswana? And then they type my name in and then they see this podcast. And I may be a completely different person, but it's interesting. In fact, if you go back to my first season and the second season and listen to what I'm saying and compare that to what I've been saying to you today, you can see that there's been development over these past 3 or 4 years already. So I know that in 10 years time, I'm definitely going to be different, but it'll be interesting to see what was he like in the year 2022? What was he doing during the pandemic and so on and so forth? That's how the scholar and the student started.
Okay. And how about the name, like the scholar and the student? How did you come up with that?
Yeah, so that was also because I envisaged it to have myself and Imam Jawad from Palape, Jawad Dalabani, as the co-host. So he's a scholar, I'm a student. So as in he's a scholar of Islam, obviously, and I was a student of law, obviously a law graduate who's working in a law firm right now. But that was kind of the play. But at times I wanted to play with it that, you know, sometimes I could be speaking on a topic that he's not heard of before. So he becomes a student and I become a scholar. Or we get someone else who is like a guest and he has expertise in some area that we are completely clueless about. So we become students and he becomes the scholar. I think to an extent, even though Imam Jawad is not the permanent co-host, but I think we've kind of kept that vibe, so to speak. I mean, I've had other Islamic scholars on, so they are scholars, I'm the student. And I've had musicians on, Celt Islam, who played at Glastonbury. And he had such a wealth of experience because, you know, he became Muslim. He was part of the punk movement in the UK. He talked about his experiences with LSD, and now you see why this is controversial and why,
I can see
why he believes that, you know, I think he talked about how he was at someone's shahada and they were saying the shahada while tripping on LSD. I'm like, where has this guy been?
Whoa, this is very, very interesting stuff.
Yeah. So there's always learning and teaching happening. And I'd say that even in this episode, well, you're a teacher, which I guess if you take the Arabic word for it, you know, like alim, alima, that kind of gets interchanged with scholar. So there's always something I want to learn from whoever I'm getting onto my platform. So that's the vibe I want to keep. Obviously, sometimes I might do something experimental, but yeah, there's always the vibe of learning and teaching. That's the scholar and the student.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And how do you find like the different people that you've had on your podcast, on your YouTube channel? How do you find these people?
For the most part, alhamdulillah. So I think each season has kind of had a different vibe to it. So season 1, I think I was a lot more conservative back then. In fact, I know I was a lot more conservative back then. I had long hair, but I'd never tie it. And, you know, I was almost 24 hours. I looked like some Arab dude. And I once got asked, by the way, this is kind of funny. I was in a masjid and someone asked me if I'm related to Mufti Menk because I had the scarf on. I'm like, No, I'm not. But anyway, so I was definitely more conservative. So if you look at season one, it's really not as controversial. Although,
Mm.
I did some book reviews of Howl's Moving Castle, which is a famous Ghibli
Oh,
movie.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I did the series, like the book series. There are 3 books in the series. And before I started that review, I just did damage control. I'm like, I know you guys are foaming at the mouth because I'm reviewing a romance novel with magic and all these things that I know you idiots have like issues with. So can you just calm down and listen to the lessons I'm extracting? And I think my
Mm.
most viewed episode for season one was called Harry Potter and Islam. And
Oh, interesting.
yeah, it was with a
Interesting.
brother from the UK, Salahuddin Mazari, great brother. So we just talked on and on about Harry Potter, our experiences with it, and
Oh,
the
cool.
the Islamic lessons we can have like extracted from Harry Potter. And it just became a platform to like meet new people, such as yourself. And season two,
Mhm.
meeting Imam Madhar. Imam Madhar is an interesting way, like how I came across him. So he went on a podcast with someone like his teacher is my teacher. Let's put it like that, like in terms of
Okay.
learning Maliki fiqh. So Mufti Abu Layth, he went on a podcast with Mufti Abu Layth from Birmingham, UK. And I'm like, hey, Imam Mother looks pretty cool. So I followed him on Instagram. And then as I was releasing season one and I came to the end, I got a message from an Imam from Francistown, which is another like city in Botswana. He's like, I've got a friend in Canada who does something similar to you. Would you like to like hook up and do something together? I'm like, yeah, sure. And then he sends me the number for Imam Madhar. I'm like, hey, I know this guy. I've been following him on Instagram for like, I don't know how many months. So
Oh.
yeah, so that was surreal. I'm like, oh, someone I've been observing from a distance is now like a close friend of mine, I would say. And I'm always, speaking to him about Islamic advice and so on and so forth. So it's
Mhm.
been really cathartic in a way to experience meeting new people, especially during a pandemic when we didn't have the avenue
Yeah.
to go
Yeah.
outside, and
Yeah.
meeting people who have gone through so much but come to like similar conclusions to yourself. And like Imam Madhar was talking about, I know this is a contentious topic and I think it's obvious which way I go, like music is not haram and so on and so forth. And I've got 2 episodes called The Musical Muslim. One was with Celt Islam, one was with Professor James Hodkinson. We talked about music for hours on end. So I'd say for the most part it's been really positive. I've gotten one funny message because Sheikh Ismail Kamdar, who's my neighbor, he's from Durban. So he was once on my podcast and
Yeah.
he talked about, I don't know what you call it in like Malay, but like the kufi or the topi, whatever, like the hat thing that,
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
men
Yeah.
wear.
Yeah.
So he was talking about like, look, that's not sunnah. That's like a cultural thing. You want to wear it, cool, but don't like guilt people into thinking that that's part of the religion.
Mhm.
And that's,
Yeah.
look,
Yeah.
you follow something else. If you don't believe him, that's fine. So I posted that on a group on WhatsApp and I got messages at 3 a.m. telling me that I'm destroying the unity of the ummah by posting controversial things. I'm like, you people have not seen controversy if that's what you think. But yeah, that's like a negative experience. But I don't, take that sort of, yeah, I don't take that sort of like rubbish into stride because I know the path I'm walking on. Whichever path you walk on, there's always going to be someone throwing stones at you. Like I'm Maliki. Yeah, I don't think music is
Yeah, that's
haram.
true.
I'm a dude who ties his hair and wears earrings. So there's only so much you can do with not being controversial. So yeah, I mean, I have to be
Yeah.
authentic to myself, and that's why I really take this
Of
podcast close to my
course.
heart
Yeah.
because it's an expression of my authentic self.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then for you, do you like, are you just like, okay, like maybe you just end up following people on social media and you kind of like, hey, like I mean, I think with me, like I think maybe you saw my YouTube channel. I don't know if it was like, is it more just like organic, like you just end up finding these people, or is it more like you search for things like, okay, let's find like Muslims in, I don't know, Iceland, or is it just like, yeah, how does that happen?
Yeah, so when it comes to choosing guests, I just have basically 2 criteria. You must be interested to come on and interesting, as in
Mm.
something of value to contribute. So, there's various ways how I come across these people. I mentioned Mufti Abu Layth, and this is weird, but I'm usually stealing his guests because he has a podcast of his own.
Oh, okay,
So yeah,
okay.
sometimes they've got like interesting topics to talk about. That's how I got in last season. I got Professor Dr. Syed Hamad Ali, who has his he's also from Canada, mind you. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, you can definitely check that out in your own time. So he was on Mufti Abu Laith's podcast, and he's not very active on social media, doesn't have a Facebook, well, maybe he doesn't have Instagram, but he's on Skype and he only emails people, or Skype only.
Oh,
So I just started talking to him on Skype, and then we hit it off together, and then we finally did an episode together. Same with Celt Islam. I poached him from Mufti Abu Laith, and many people I'm poaching from Mufti Abu Laith, and he even told me, go for it, man. Like, you know, it's all the better because we come together as a like close, tight-knit community in that weird sort of way. So yeah, with your case in particular, I think I first saw you when you did I think it was her video though, Barno Suleiman, when you both went to Tokyo.
Yeah, my friend.
Yeah. I mean, I first saw Barno on Life Where I'm From when they did that episode, her and her husband. So they were interviewing them about what it's like to be Muslim in Japan. And then I subscribed to her.
Yes. That's a very popular video.
Yeah. So from there, I kind of hit it off. And then I saw your video with her. And then I don't know what led to another thing, but I subscribed to you. And then I saw you were on Instagram. I thought that I didn't have a female guest until then. So I thought of messaging you, and here we are.
That's really cool. I think it's really cool what you do. I think it's something that I think a lot of the community needs to hear different voices that are out there, and what other Muslims are doing around the world. So I think that's really cool, like what you do. So
yeah, thank you very much for your commendation. So that is basically what the scholar and the student has become. It's a mouthpiece, and it is until today the first established Muslim podcast in Botswana. So I know that there's immense social capital because of that. In fact, I actually got my current job because of it. So, well, I wouldn't pin it down to just...
Really? Okay.
I wouldn't pin it out to just the podcast, but I had an episode with Momadou Tal. He goes by, on Instagram, you can find him The Gambian, because that's where his lineage stems from. So I had an episode with him, and my current boss, Mr. Majinia, actually watched, I don't know how much of it he watched, but he watched that episode. And when he was interviewing me, he actually said, I watched your episode with the Gambian gentleman, and I was really impressed with what you were saying. So yeah, like I said, I won't say that was the reason I got hired, but it was definitely an X factor, because how many other people did he interview who have podcasts? So there we go.
That's really cool. That's cool for sure. Yeah, that's kind of interesting how I guess social media plays a bigger role in like before it's just, maybe, more professional resumes or LinkedIn, but now people will look at what your social media is like and kind of find out what kind of person you are based on the things that you post or share on social media. So it's kind of interesting how the world is changing with that.
Absolutely. And I think the same can be said for your YouTube videos as well. If there ever comes a point when, I don't know, you want to get transferred or you want to get another job and you want to get hired, I'm sure someone's going to step across your YouTube channel and say, hey, okay, that's what she's about. And, that's what her character is like. Because at the end of the day, you can be really qualified, but if you're an arrogant prick, then you're not actually hireable material. So I think that's what these videos and these audio clips and podcasts allow us to sort of, project onto the audience that's consuming it, whether they like us or not. Alhamdulillah. So anyway, Mana, we've been going on for quite a while, alhamdulillah.
For a while. Yeah.
So just to round up, I'd like to ask, what do you envisage, and you can be as tight-lipped about this as you want, what do you envisage to be the future of PanAsian Goes Global? Do you have any surprises in store that we can look forward to? Or maybe, how long do you intend to live in Japan? I know everyone gets asked that question and everyone says, maybe I'll leave next year, and then 10 years later, they're still there. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, so actually, I forgot, that's something I wanted to add earlier. So PanAsian Goes Global, I talked about it like, I guess I didn't talk about why specifically Pan-Asian. I mentioned earlier, this is sort of going away from your point, but just from the much earlier question, why Pan-Asian Goes Global. So I mentioned earlier that my family's from Singapore, I'm Malay, but the reason why I chose Pan-Asian specifically is, so my family also have Chinese and Indian blood as well. So I feel like kind of covers not all of Asia, but Southeast to East and South Asia. And I've lived in different parts of Asia or traveled to different parts of Asia. So that's why I have the Pan-Asian, specifically Pan-Asian, and then Goes Global. In some ways, I'm like, oh, maybe I can, in some ways, be a representative of Asia. And in terms of, I guess, what you can expect from my channel, I I mean, sometimes I kind of do find it challenging to have like a full-time job and like other things I'm doing in my life, and also have a YouTube channel. I'm sure that you can understand with doing the same thing. But yeah, I'm hoping to put out more interviews of Muslim people in Japan, and also more masjids, musallas, prayer areas, as well as maybe restaurants. And also, I think maybe in the future, I want to maybe do more personal videos, so maybe a bit about like my experience as a Muslim in Japan. I know I haven't really done that yet. It's like only been maybe, very indirect, but now that I've put a few videos out there, I'm hoping to do more personal ones. And especially now, because Japan, there's a growing number of Muslims, especially after the Olympics or leading up to the Olympics. They wanted to do, develop the halal industry and attract more Muslim visitors. So yeah, definitely. I think for people who are listening and watching this, I definitely think you should, if you have the opportunity to visit Japan, especially if you're Muslim, there are a lot of more Muslim friendly things, and it's a beautiful country. So. And so I didn't answer your question, how long I'm going to stay in Japan. I feel like I'd like to stay in Japan for at least the next few years, but we'll see where life takes me. But yeah, I'd like to stay for at least a few years, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, amazing, mashallah. So you were kind of addressing that as me, because I've been wanting to go to Japan since 2020 Olympics, which did happen in 2021. So that was,
yes.
For me, that was like the biggest Giga Chad move ever. Like, yes, it's a year late, but it's still 2020 Olympics. So deal with it. So yeah, that was amazing. Amazing. Alhamdulillah. Unfortunately, didn't get to go because I was definitely not vaccinated.
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah. But now things are opening up, inshallah. Maybe I'll be there soon, inshallah. Let's
well, let me know.
Yeah, and I will end off on saying that every time I get a guest such as yourself or Salahuddin, you guys, I always think I have a diverse background, but then when I listen to your stories, I'm like, maybe not, because yeah, I've also got like multiple Southeast Asian countries in my blood, which is weird. I once met a Korean guy here in Gabs in Khabaroni, and he said I looked Arab. I get a lot of things. People tell me I look Egyptian, I look Iraqi, I look Afghanistani. I'm like, never been to those places. That's interesting. Yeah, bit of a mix. But brother Salahuddin is also like half Syrian, half Pakistani, and probably a bunch of other things up there. So I guess I kind of lost the diversity war, but going forward, maybe we'll see how to mix up the blood, inshallah. But people will leave the links to Mana's channel down below. Are you comfortable with them having your Instagram dials as well?
Yeah, sure. Yep. So you can find me on Instagram, PanAsian, or on YouTube, PanAsian Goes Global.
Amazing. We'll put them down in the description below. Hope everyone enjoyed and had a great time listening to Mana about teaching Japan and everything else in between, and getting a bit controversial there when she was asking me questions, but controversy is the name of the game nowadays, so who cares? Don't take it so seriously. Take it easy, inshallah. Until next time, if you're watching this during Ramadan, have a blessed Ramadan and Eid. May you be able to celebrate with your loved ones this year, and may it be beneficial for you in every sense of the word. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace out. Mana, arigatou gozaimasu. Terima kasih.
Arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you so much for having me.
It was an honor. Thank you so very much for sticking around till the end. We really appreciate it. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And if you're using an audio platform, give us a 5-star rating. All of these things drive up the algorithm, as well as commenting. So let us know how it was for you. The Patreon and Ko-fi links are active down below. If you wish to use them, that's up to you. In Ramadan, I do recommend that you use Launch Good or any other charity app instead. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.